You still have to just be like, let's just hang on a second here.
To hear like, oh, half of the visitors to my web property are no longer humans.
That's my I'm not afraid of Skynet. There's people looking around and going, are we overstaffed? Fast forward in the future, who knows?
Get to it fast. Right here on the Anycast. Make it strong, make it last. Right here on the Anycast.
Welcome, everybody, to another hopefully exciting episode of the Anycast. I'm here today with somebody who has quite the background in CDN, and I think more importantly today is working on, I think, what's top of mind for most people, certainly that we talk about on the broadcast side, which is how does one know what's going on with one's stuff, whether that's CDN or Origin or everything in between. So we've got Simon from Hydrolix today, and we are going to get into some pretty interesting stuff, I hope. For those who don't know, Simon, do you want to give us, you don't have to go all the way back to conception, but who are you, how did we get here, and where are we going?
Sure. Super happy to be here. And, thanks for having me. This is, there's so much good stuff going on. Your anti-piracy episode, I thought was really special. It was great to see Jason from SVTA too, right? Like really interesting stuff kind of happening in the space. And so who am I? Why am I here? I'm Simon, last name Ouderkirk, tough to spell, but fun to say. I've recently joined Hydrolix in this product leadership role, VP product at Hydrolix. I've got a pretty checkered professional past. I joined my first tech firm, was this company called Automatic, which was the parent company of Tumblr, WordPress.com, and some other open source products. I had the good fortune of sort of leaving there, leading the data and analytics organization, which was kind of CDN, some network adjacency there. Heard the siren song of early stage startups, like so many of us, right? Sort of went in and out a couple of places there. Ended up at Disney, working again in the product organization. There I ended up helping to run the business unit that's really focused on content distribution, sort of the networking decisions that have to go around that, as well as the tooling that you use to manage a global conglomerate of multiple industrial CDNs, as well as, Disney does have a first-party CDN. And then following that, I was there for about 5 years. And I was really excited to join Hydrolix. The technology that is being built at this firm is really remarkable. The talent has been super impressive. Like I'm really looking forward to kind of every day in some ways. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, before we get into what you're doing now, one of the questions that frequently comes up is, everybody's on some version of the streaming journey. At something like Disney scale, is there something that most people fundamentally misunderstand about like running infrastructure at that level?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's people and there's people, right? Like I think working at Disney for sure led me to understand like how little most of the humans I run into day to day understand the internet and like how things get like onto your phone, right? To the, well, it's called a CDN and it stands for Content Delivery Network, and it kind of gets to your phone, and it's like I had a whole like spider web metaphor, like multiple spider webs, and you have to make choices to get between them. I think for a more technical audience, when I talk to other tech folks, I think the incredible like Cartesian join of interlocking systems is, I think it's really hard to think about. It's really hard to reason about, especially when you start to think about like, okay, Disney's like 200 million customers across 6 continents, sometimes 7 continents, more devices than you could ever possibly think of, being delivered content in formats you've never heard of, sometimes through like ISPs and mobile carriers that are like tiny like micro regional providers, and you're trying to provide those people the best possible experience of like pretty important storytelling, and just trying to get it as right as you can while maintaining your like more abstract like business strategy outcomes. It's very hard to reason about. And yeah, I mean, that to me is the thing that I think a lot of folks, even pretty technically savvy folks, kind of get wrong. They sort of bump up against the kind of classic Dunning-Kruger idea, right? Which is, oh, I understand what a CDN is. It gets content to someone on the edge. Like, of course, I get it. And it isn't until I had this experience myself, it isn't until you're really sort of faced with the depth of those problems that it washes over you like, oh my gosh, this is more complicated than I could have ever imagined. And I was so fortunate at Disney and now at Hydrolix to have very bright, very generous colleagues who were really willing to kind of help me come to a much deeper understanding myself.
One of the themes that I feel like has changed over the years is like if I go back to early CDN days, to borrow a current buzzword, the moat was kind of CapEx, right? Like the moat was how hard it is to deploy infrastructure in all these places. And fast forward to today, and it's like, oh, you want a 60 pop CDN? Give me a credit card in about 42 minutes, and we'll get that built for you. But the operational complexity, I think today is some version of either the moat or, to your point, the thing that people don't really take into account, which is like it doesn't matter how many or where things are if you don't, as an organization or a group within an organization, know what your playbook is when there's a fiber cut in Des Moines. All that stuff doesn't matter, right? Like if everything hinges on deliverability being perfect, you've built something that doesn't work in the real world.
You're totally I think cluing into something that a lot of folks are starting to struggle with. And I think that struggle really, there's a metaphor. You've probably heard this saying, right? Like the map is not the territory, right? The idea is like, I mean, anytime this is true for maps and cartography generally, but I think this is also true for any time we measure anything at all, right? Like measurement is necessarily reductive, right? Like the world is kind of complicated and tricky, and there's often more facts about something than we're really able to think about at once. We say like, oh, this is a 2x4. And it evokes for you, like, oh, it's a piece of wood, it's a certain size, but there's way more to it than that, right? Like how many rings are there? Like, is it bent? Is it not bent? Like, is it hardwood? Is it softwood? But we say it's a 2x4 and it's good enough. And I think often, especially when folks are thinking about the kind of like Cartesian join complexity in especially multi-CDN landscapes, like they have for a very long time seen the map as like good enough. Right? The highly reduced, like aggregated understanding of my overall landscape, refreshed maybe every 15 minutes or like super heavily sampled, like that's good enough, right? I'm able to achieve the outcomes to my satisfaction. But the thing about just living at that map level and never really coming to appreciate like the incredible complexity of the actual landscape itself leads you to having to compromise both on, oh, I'm failing to really capture all of the opportunities in front of me, some of which are, literal quality of experience for your customers, some of which are financial. And like, I'm not fully appreciating like degradation or risk that's present in my current landscape, right? Like to say, oh, I'm going to live with the map. Like the territory is too expensive or isn't interesting to me, or I'm not operationally sophisticated enough to even act on it. Well, I mean, that's okay. And I think that's been for a long time business as usual for many firms. But as we move into the future, as we look at more sophisticated operators really starting to capture those opportunities and really reduce those risks, like the cost of leaving your business kind of at that super zoomed out aggregated level, I think that cost is just going to keep going up over time.
Yeah. One of my favorite expressions, it used to be my email signature, at least privately, whatever I used on mailing lists, because I keep finding it showing up in Internet Archives, is in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is.
Yeah.
And
I like that.
I feel like that shows up a lot in those situations, right? Everybody's like, or a more, maybe a more pop culture version of it, I think applies to most people doing either large scale events or their large scale delivery as they're sort of transitioning, is like, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. It's that too, right? It's like you thought how this, you read the map, you thought you knew how this was going to go, and then all of a sudden the reality of the actual world sets in, and you're like, this is not doable. And I think that's an interesting jumping off point, because everybody likes to use multi-CDN as some version of a safety net / this is how I'm going to make things more resilient / but one of the conversations that keeps coming up too is like, it also creates some level of infinite complexity, which I think is why, Hydrolix is the right thing at the right time, right? Is like, it's what people I think underestimate, especially if you're just looking on the outside, which I think a lot of people are, right? Like a lot of people are like, well, today, I'm just on AWS, but once X happens, we're going to go multi-CDN. And they underestimate, like the first question is like, well, who's broken? When you only have one vendor, that problem is so straightforward, easy to solve, that it doesn't even require a conversation. And then as soon as you go even to 2 CDNs, but let's say you go to 4 or 5, who is broken? Forget what, forget
Right.
where, you just
Right.
go who. That becomes operationally so complex that if you don't have experience and you don't have policies and procedures and data and analytics and stuff in place, you get paralyzed. You spend so long trying to figure out who, you never even get to the what. In a world of you mentioned people doing sampling, historically as a acceptable practice. In a world where I like to think all of that potential revenue, either gain or loss, lives in the 99th percentile. How does somebody today, look at, do they have enough information to make good decisions, for an event?
Yeah. I mean, so many places to go in this conversation, in this question, right? I think that there are sort of a number of levers that when we think about a multi-CDN strategy, we've got to kind of be thoughtful about. The first is, you mentioned reliability, right? Like ultimately, if all of your content, whether it's streaming media or web assets or whatever, is being delivered by a single vendor, like you are at the mercy of their reliability, right? And introducing additional vendors give you greater anti-fragility. The world is complicated. CDNs are complicated. Like your ability to ensure ongoing delivery to your customers, regardless of what happens at a particular vendor, like that feels net positive. I think the second part is also really important, is to think about like the economics of multi-CDN. I think often folks get a little bit enamored with the idea of, if I'm engaging with these multiple global CDNs and like some small regional partners, I'm going to be able to engage in like price arbitrage. I'm going to, deeply understand like where I'm delivering what in each region. And, they count Mexico as North America and they count Mexico as South America. Like, how do I? And it's very easy to kind of get lost in the sauce and be like, here's my spreadsheet and I can save this much. And it's very easy to lose sight of the just incredible operational complexity that you're signing yourself up for, and that may not actually bear the benefit that you expect. And then the third part is a little bit almost like cultural, maybe strategic is a better word for that, which is a lot of folks, and I think this is maybe true for many commodity industries. I briefly worked in international coffee trading, which is also a commodity, like in the strictest sense, right? Like it is a good. If it is at a particular grade, you can expect it to be about the same regardless of where you're purchasing it. And there's this kind of interesting tension, cultural, strategic, between large CDNs and their customers. And that tension is a customer, especially one really leaning into the multi-CDN space, is deeply incentivized to keep that relationship in that commodity space, right? Like in order for their economic and a little bit, even in the reliability piece too, in order for that to be maximally successful for the customer, they need to understand that every unit, every piece of content that's delivered is going to be about the same from any particular vendor, right? Because that is the assumption upon which all of their workflows rest. Whereas it's deeply in the interest of the CDNs themselves, like as businesses, to diversify out of the commodity business, right? But also to try to differentiate their delivery service in some way, right? Maybe it's like fallback, maybe it's origin protection. There's sort of a long list, right? And they really want to be able to say like, when you deliver with us, it's interestingly more valuable, or it's interestingly more effective, or it's more reliable than our competitors, right? So there's this really interesting push and pull. Like, I want these to all be commoditized, but like you're incentivized to keep them, right? You want to differentiate in some way. So there's these sort of three angles, right? Reliability is for sure an aspect of it, but I think the economic part is what drives a lot of people into like really leaning into the multi-CDN approach. And then this idea of like this tension And the tension there is also interesting because it creates a gap. And the gap is really in this operational space, because you can imagine if you're Fastly, you're not really incentivized to provide an operational surface that includes your competitors, right? Because a little bit that's sort of leaning into that commoditization space, right? That's sort of acknowledging that, oh yeah, these are all about the same, and here's a way for you to understand all of them together.
Yeah.
Right. And that is sort of what the Hydrolix multi-CDN observability platform is meant to help address, right? It's like, look, no CDN is going to be incentivized to show you your entire traffic pattern, right? They're going to provide you data on what they are doing, operational tooling to impact that. And it's good. I mean, it's really helpful. And especially when we think about the nature of Hydrolix and the sort of brand promise and the technical promise there, full fidelity logs, keep them for a really long time, often at a lower cost, right? It's this really interesting both cost and differentiated outcome that people really like.
Mm-hmm.
And it fits really well into this multi-CDN space because the actual vendors of that product are not incentivized to provide that operational or analytics tooling.
Sure.
Right. In fact, they're a little bit incentivized not to.
Right.
Well,
yeah. I mean, that's, to your point about the tension between the customer and the CDN. I mean, the oldest version of that tension, which still is around today, is the combative approach to issues, right? Like customer says, I have an issue. CDN says, prove it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Not, oh, let's figure that out. We want to get that solved. The default position is, no, we don't. What do you have to back up your claim? Which, on a practical basis as an operator, customers frequently are very, very wrong about what is happening, right? So like, in some sense, it's not a bad heuristic to be like, just because the customer says A is true does not mean A is true. On the flip side, it need not be and probably shouldn't be a combative relationship. Either way, it should be, let's get to the bottom of this together.
Right.
And then, but in a world where you're also not incentivized to provide as much data as humanly possible, for years it was, CDN problems just went away, right? There was an issue and now it's gone and nobody can really articulate what happened. So I think and again, I don't think that's good for CDNs, right? Like objectively, if we have a problem, the best economic outcome for all parties is for us to not either fix the problem and or not have the problem again.
Right.
So it's not like we're disincentivized from trying to fix problems. It's just became this thing where, if you're, the big A vendor, it's like, well, we're so big, we'd know if we had a problem. And if it's not on our dashboard, it doesn't exist. And you're really going to have to provide a lot of evidence to the contrary to make us start to want to investigate this. And, from where I sit, that's no way to run a railroad, right? Like you think of any other industry. That's not how you want to start a problem-solving discussion. Right. But there's a data gap, right? So, fixing the data gap all of a sudden changes the conversation where instead of being like, hey, there, what's going on? It's here is what I see, right? Here's all the data. Let's look at this together collaboratively and let's see if we can figure out what's going on.
I think that's right. I mean, and ultimately, I think there is an alignment of like ultimate and end game alignment, right? Like the CDN and the, ultimate vendor, ultimate customer, I guess, want the person at the end of the line to receive whatever is being delivered, like at a higher quality, at a low latency, at an appropriate cost, right? Like I think everyone is aligned on that particular outcome, but the sort of internal incentives to like deliver that in a way that works for the business are a little bit trickier, right? And I don't blame anyone for behaving in accordance with their incentives. Like how could you do otherwise, right? That is sort of, that's the whole ball game. I do think we're talking a lot about the sort of streaming space in particular, right? Streaming media, live events. And like, this is really where that multi-CDN, it becomes this, it's like a Gordian knot almost, because I don't know if that's the right metaphor. It'll come to me, because often the like highest value moments of that event are the ones which are like the highest pressure on the underlying operational system, right? And I think so often when we're thinking from this like map perspective, like that is when you absolutely need to start diving in to the landscape itself, right? Because if you're accepting a level of sampling, like if you're accepting a level of like reporting latency, if people are watching the World Cup and you've got a degraded experience for some of your customers in some region on some device, if that falls below your alerting threshold, you may never know that they're having that experience.
Right.
Or they may be having this really negative experience for like multiple seconds. And multiple seconds, like for me and you right now, doesn't seem like that much. But multiple seconds, especially if that's like in overtime or if that's like around a potential for goal, like that is so important and so valuable, right? And this is where the operational piece, like I do not think operational value, like the value to the customer that nuanced operational tooling and workflows represents, like the way that live sports and live events are interesting is that every minute is not equally valuable, right?
Right.
And a little bit like the time that you get a given minute is also not equally valuable. Okay, what does that mean? This feels like hopelessly obtuse. But like if you think about like, okay, if you're watching the first episode of The Mandalorian, right? I'm like showing my Disney roots here. If you're watching the first episode of The Mandalorian, like you don't really care if you watch minute number 9 minutes after you start the video or not, right? Like, oh, I'm going to get up and go to the bathroom. I'm going to go get a snack. It buffers for 30 seconds. Like whether that minute number 9 shows at like 9:09 p.m. or 9:14 p.m., it's about the same value to you as the end customer. But if you're watching Josh Allen throw possibly the game-winning touchdown in the Super Bowl, like you want to watch it when it's happening, right? Like actually watching it 4 minutes later because your TV is buffering, that is actually an enormous problem, right? And in that way, like operational sophistication and really zooming in to the actual landscape and not accepting like 30-second latency and sampled inputs, like it's a little, what do I mean to say? I mean to say different pieces of content, different delivery landscapes deserve different levels of understanding, right? And if your tooling and your workflow doesn't reflect that some things need to be delivered differently and some like value propositions are different, then ultimately you're just going to kind of deliver everything in a consistent way, which is going to fail to meet that value delta for especially like live events.
Sure. I want to go back to the live event thing a second. I just wanted to touch on 2.5 things that you said. The first is, I think everybody thinks about reliability differently, right? And like multi-CDN as a reliability approach, even at the map level or at the in theory level, most people think about reliability relatively black and white, right? Things are up or things are down. Not there's this one TV in this one place that's, slower than everything else. Whether you call that reliability or performance is maybe art versus science. But even at the high black and white level, I think, there is a missing piece that people don't always think through with multi-CDN, which is if your premise is reliability, then you also need the decision maker thing to have more reliability than a large globally operated commercial CDN, right? Like if you're saying we need reliability away from Akamai, let's say, then whatever you're using as your decision-making engine needs to, by definition, more reliable than Akamai in order to even get whatever the perceived gain is, right? So that's like I think the first thing that people tend to just quickly overlook is like, oh yeah, then I won't have reliability issues. And it's like, well, you still have a single point of failure. You just moved it from a CDN that's run a lot of large events globally for a really long time to either, vendor or Tim from Products Code, or like, what is that thing that's more reliable than the commercial CDN, I think is, again, in a world where it's black and white and we're not talking about, edge casey things. But frequently when I hear people talk about it, that's the way they talk about it, right? It's like, well, what if Akamai or CloudFront goes down in the middle of my game? And it's like, the probability is your traffic switcher is going to go down in the middle of your game way more than global outage for large CDN, right? So I see that as a blind spot for people. And then the other one related is and I don't know enough about game theory or economics to really find the equilibrium, but I sort of still think of CDN, it's not quite that much anymore. I still think of CDN a little bit as a proxy for transit. And, you know, I have learned, as many people have, that like actually distributing your commit across many, many vendors does not actually get you an economic benefit, nearly, even if you think you can play them off each other, nearly as much as making larger commitments to a fewer number of vendors. And I know you mentioned earlier, you know, the spreadsheet where you have the this and this and this, and it's
Yeah.
like, sure, but buying larger volume gets you better pricing in pretty much every industry on earth, including CDN. And I think that's the other thing people hope more than analyze, right? Is like, oh, if I can make the CDNs compete, I'll be able to get better pricing. And it's like, well, it's not really aligned with anybody's either investors or share price or whatever to do that, as much as it's to go, hey, the best way to get a good price from me is give me a larger commitment for a longer period of time.
I think some part of it too, I'm like really showing my like philosophy major in this conversation. I think some part of it too is that we really like to have certainty, and ultimately the things that are like easy to measure and easy to understand are the things that often, especially in big enterprises, are going to drive what we get done. And I think that is what's really appealing about that like economic arbitrage play, is because you can show the spreadsheet, right? It's very easy to display on a slide deck. Whereas to say like, we need to invest in this long tail of quality of experience issues, and they all need to be understood. And we need to make sure that like each ISP in Europe has like the appropriate attention so that all of our customers, right? Like that is hard to understand, right? It's not as easy to understand as like, oh, if we can get this from them and that from them, we can play them against each other, and it's going to be 8% less this quarter. Do you know what I mean? And I think a little bit, one of the things that we're trying to do at Hydrolix is kind of pull more things into that easy to understand, like easy to observe space, right? Because so much, when we think about logs, especially CDN logs, oh my gosh, like it's an absolute ocean of information. It's so much data and it's always coming in. And especially if you're thinking about multi-CDN, it's coming in many different formats. Like this is by definition something that is like challenging to reason about and very challenging to represent in a clean way, in a way that can drive results, especially in big enterprises. And one of the things that Hydrolix does is it makes all of that like reasonable. In some ways, it's creating that map upon like an increasingly challenging landscape, right? But it's creating it in a way that maintains that high fidelity of the territory, which is a little bit contrary to what I was saying at the very beginning, right? Which is all measurement is reductive.
Yeah.
But it is really helpful because it allows you to have the sort of broader strategic insights of the map without giving up the ability to sort of really get into the nuance, which when you're talking about like petabytes of CDN logs, like that's where so much of those like long tail improvements come from.
Yeah.
And a little bit like thinking about a global delivery of content to people all over the world 24/7, like anything that's big enough to rise to your alerting threshold, like that's a huge problem, of course.
Yeah.
But the larger that audience base is, like so many like little degradations and little source of frustrations are going to fall below your alerting threshold. So if you're sort of accepting that with any like any kind of measurement that accepts aggregation or accepts sampling or even accepts a little bit like a 7-day retention window, like it's just a lot of compromises that I think are often just kind of assumed to be okay, right? And that's a little bit the fundamental promise of Hydrolix, is to say like, hey, I know when you started in Google Analytics, like your Google Analytics 101 certification said like, we're going to sample the data and it's okay, everything's going to be okay. But now we want to kind of challenge that, right? We want to kind of push back on that and say, look, the technology has changed, the world has changed, our interfaces into that data have changed, and we need to kind of change our mindset around that too.
Yeah. I think also one of the interesting things about having that data set relative to something you mentioned earlier is I tend to push back on this all the time. You know, you defined a commodity very well in your definition of what makes something a commodity. Most people's definition of CDN being a commodity is it gets cheaper every year. Not necessarily that they're interchangeable Lego blocks. They're just like, oh, it's a commodity, why it gets cheaper. Like people have sort of swapped the definition of commoditized pricing with something being a commodity. And I think one of the things I would expect a customer to see with that sort of ocean of data that one would get is it's not actually quite as much a commodity as one would like it to be. And I think most CDN buyers intuitively know that, though won't say it out loud, right? Which it's as simple as like, going to somebody and be like, hey, what's your basic traffic steering today? And they say, we put 60% of North America goes on CloudFront by default. Well, great. It's a commodity. I'll do it for 1% cheaper. Can you move 60% to new CDN? Nobody goes, yeah, it's a commodity. Everything will work great. Everybody goes,
Yeah.
I don't know what that's going to be like. But it's the same person who says CDN is a commodity will also not do a wholesale change to a different commodity, which is the definition of it being a commodity. Is they would like it to be interchangeable, but they will not interchange it. I think from a data analytics standpoint, I think that bears out, even to go back to the pre-Hydrolix, at Sidexis when Marty was doing, there was 3 sets of graphs, right? There was CDNA, there was CDNB, and then there was what happens when you combine CDNA and B. And it turns out it's not the same line at all. It's actually this crazy new line up here where you take the best of all worlds, and or hide the worst of all worlds. Objectively, that's what people should be trying to do in their CDN mix, but it's a guessing game, right? And being able to backfill all of that with the actual analytics of non-sampled, to your point, every single request, I think, one of the probably learnings most people would have is either that when they say it's a commodity, it's not really a commodity, or B, that gut reaction when you just say, why don't we just wholesale swap what CDN we're using in the United Kingdom right before the live event, right? People, like, if you're running that team, there's a feeling in your stomach when somebody says that out loud, and the feeling is not, oh, this is a coffee bean and everything will roast just fine.
Yeah.
But today it's a guessing game, right? There's really no data behind that. And I think the sampling piece is really important because it is long to, like, realistically 70% of people on great internet connections in places that are well served are going to have a great experience. And
Right.
if you are using that to make up 90% or 70% of your data, you're missing so much. And I think, again, easy for me to say from the operator side, but like that's what we focus on, right? Like I don't wake up every day and go, man, I sure hope I did great to Verizon in Ashburn yesterday, because that's such a hard market to serve. How do you see the data changing, or has it started changing yet, people's perception of what their end user experience actually is?
I think the big change that's happening right now around how folks perceive the data that they choose to keep or that they're trying to decide whether to keep or not. I mean, this is so pat, right? I feel like this is what everybody says all the time in 2026, but I really do think that AI is changing that game in a way that is hard to predict, but a little bit does seem really good for us to be like as blunt as I possibly can be.
Yeah.
In part because like so many of the trade-offs around data retention and sort of data fidelity have been driven by like cost. This goes back to what we were talking about before, right? Like ultimately, like the things that are easy for us to understand, talk about, and communicate about are going to be the things that like most strongly inform our prioritization and decision making. It's the same reason that if you go to the gym and you never write anything down and you don't keep a log, you're not going to be as motivated to continue to do that as someone who is like writing down like, oh, every week I'm improving, right? In some way, like what you measure is what you manage. And AI, especially so many of these like LLM analytics, agentic workflows have suddenly introduced to so many of our customers and so many of the people that we're seeing in the marketplace, this idea that, oh, a 7-day retention window, it isn't just a compromise that is helping us spend less money over time for data storage. It's actually a compromise on the context that we can provide these like modern agentic workflows, right? Like if what you're trying to do is understand, like, is what I'm seeing today anomalous to what I saw last month or this time last year? If all that your agentic workflow can look at are logs from the last 7 days, it's going to be very, very challenging for you to understand like any kind of a longer look back window. And same for sampling, right? Same for any of these trade-offs that we've discussed around retention and around fidelity. Like the greater you're able to achieve that context to then provide into these modern workflows, the more productive and more valuable those workflows will be. Especially when we start to talk about these like enormous Cartesian joins of multiple CDN logs, multiple CDN log types, 100 different devices, 7 different continents. Like you can imagine that type of data munging, that type of like issue identification and anomaly detection, that's the kind of thing that like Claude is incredible at.
Yeah.
Like that is the kind of thing that, I mean, there are entire teams at streaming media companies who are just looking into like, oh, we saw a rebuffering increase on this piece of content. Like we need to look at like every possible type of data related to that and put together a tiger team and come to understand like what is actually going on here. That is the kind of loop that is becoming tighter and tighter and is going to be easier and easier to address for these firms if they have access to the data that can then provide that insight out of their agentic workflow. Right?
Yeah.
And so that has really started to change that conversation for us. And that's why we're really pushing a lot of like the MCP interface. Like one of the things that I'm doing as product lead at Hydrolix is MCP is a first class interface for us. Like every product that we ship is now coming like with fully documented skills for our end customer to then plug into whatever their agentic workflow is, right? Like I don't know if dashboards are going to exist in 2 years, but it does feel like making sure that we are treating these modern interfaces very seriously is going to be a key part of the toolbox.
The way I think of it is those agentic workflows, they just expose, maybe how weak the operational data is when it's not long enough for sample. Like, as soon as you go that route, you're like, oh, this isn't good enough.
And it was good enough, right? This is the thing I always feel like I feel called to sort of do the disclaimer, which is like the world is very different today than it was 5 years ago. And to say that we need to change the way that we think about our data retention and the way that we even think about like the necessary reductive nature of measurement, like the trade-offs that we need to make today are very different than the trade-offs we had to make 5 years ago. And reassessing that and acknowledging that things are different doesn't mean that you made a bad decision then, right? It's just like you made the best decision you could, and now it's time to rethink.
Right.
And I'm sure there are some companies and people for whom like the trade-off doesn't make sense, right? I am positive that there are tons of companies that will continue to sample aggressively and keep very short look-back windows.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like they are making the right decision for their company today. But a lot of companies, especially tech companies, are really starting to rethink like, oh, there's gold in this if we keep it, if we turn these modern tools against it, right? And I get that, right? Like you don't want to hire 100 operators to do data analysis on petabytes of CDN logs, right? Like, especially if you're not sure that you're going to get anything out of it. But it feels like that calculus is changing, maybe has already changed.
I mean, if anything, it highlights the change in answer that one would have today. If the question is like, how much of that, pick your poison, whether it's multi-CDN or traditional CDN or analytics, how much of that is or was genuinely automated versus, folklore, best effort, we figure it out sort of in real time, what we're going to analyze next. Like it was very ad hoc. But to your point, in an ad hoc world, what else are you going to have? As opposed to now when the idea is like, oh, we could automate this. And then all of a sudden, when you look through that automation lens, you're like, well, actually, nothing is automated. This was all just made up as we went.
Yeah, right. The myth of the self-healing network, right? I feel like that has been, I've heard about that at NAB every year for the last how many years, right? And ultimately, I think so much of that today is just, it's just people. It's people under the hood. But I do think, I don't know. I mean, maybe people say this every time there's a new technology, but it does feel like this is different.
This is the one.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we're there.
Automate. I also say like automation is like, a regex search that decides who the page is going to go to. Mm-hmm. For a lot of people, right? Is like whose problem is this? Is the automation. Having said that, certainly right now in the AI, growth adoption curve, everything looks crazy, but, it is not lost on me that, even in a world of people, actively doing layoffs and things and stuff and blaming it on AI, which incredibly is not related to AI from my seat. yet, is like, it's not lost on me that the jobs people are worried about losing are the jobs they got because the microchip was invented, which of course was going to get rid of a lot of jobs. And then the mobile phone was invented, which of course was going to get rid of a lot of jobs. And now there's AI, which is going to get rid of a lot of jobs. Like, this is not the first technical revolution. And it's so close to the last few in the grand scheme of the timeline that it's like these jobs only exist because of the last thing that you said was gonna put people out of work.
I mean, I sort of feel like, okay, maybe this is the hot take. Maybe this is the hot take.
Yeah.
My sense is a little bit that I see blaming AI for layoffs in the same category as companies doing stock buybacks, which is, it's a little bit an admission that you're out of good ideas. Because if like management says, we have this new tool which allows us to produce 10 times more of whatever we create, software, documents, content, whatever, and as response, we're going to get rid of 90% of our human workforce. Well, that feels to me like a real failure of creativity, right? It feels like, well, why not put the people that work for you who have this deep expertise and understand the market? Like, why not create 10 times more value?
Right.
Especially like as a shareholder in a lot of these companies, it's like, what? Wait a second.
I mean, today though, that's not the question, right? Like, it's AI is a good smokescreen because it's a buzzword, and everybody's like, oh, of course, there's ChatGPT now, so of course we need 30% less. Like, it's so far, like we are talking about dipping our toes in the agentic, AI era, that it can't be that, right? That has to be a lagging indicator. Today, it's just this, to your point about share buybacks, it's the same question of like people looking around and going, are we overstaffed? Right? Like, are we getting good ROI from what we're paying people today? And if not, what should we do about it? And it's like, well, what we should do, if that's true, is probably get rid of some people or retool, right? Get less in this department, more in this department. But wait, it's going to be bad publicity if we do that. If we just say, we as a management team overhired and now we're correcting, that doesn't sound great. What could we say instead? I know. This thing that we weren't using until December, has totally.
Right.
With that said, in 3 years it might be true, right? In 3 years you might actually be able to do those things. But today it's so early. It's really just people saying, you know what? We've looked around. We think our headcount's too high, and we're going to do something about it. Which is a reasonable thing for a business to do.
Yeah.
It just feeds into the hype cycle when you say, and the reason is not, if it wasn't for, if our, intranet blocked Claude, we'd have to keep all these people. We would have we would have to keep them.
We have no choice.
We would have no choice, right? But because we haven't firewalled Claude, we're actually going to let them all go. Like, that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't pass the sniff test.
Yeah.
And the analogy I always use for this, again, at some point it will be true, is I look at golf courses keep getting these robotic mowers.
Huh. Okay.
Right? And it's just, they're little GPS mowers, and they go around, they mow the grass, which is what your maintenance team did/does. And I've asked like 15 supers or GM people, and every time I see them, like, oh, you got the robot mowers, those are cool. How much have you shrunk your team? And universally, the answer is, oh, not at all.
Not at all.
We just have them go work on better high value tasks. They now go, instead of having them go push a mower straight down a fairway, we have them take scissors and hand cut this thing around a green that it can't do or whatever. Like, somewhat to your point, the reason I brought the analogy up, there's higher value things that labor could be doing. So having this allows us to unlock that. And when you're not saying that, right? When you are saying, we've got AI and we're not going to use our labor force to unlock higher value things, we're in fact just going to let them go. If it's true, then it's what you said, right? It means we're out of good ideas. We actually don't have any higher value tasks. And in fact, we probably need to let go of our entire workforce because we can't think of anything more higher value than, whatever the LLM is working on. And again, I just think it's misleading today. Let's fast forward in the future. Who knows?
And I mean, I think a little bit this was a conversation we had a lot of at Disney, especially around like CDN operational tooling, which within my remit, we were really working on kind of engaging a lot more automation, a lot more sort of computer driven or recommendation, right? And one of the things that we always talked about was like, there are things that the computers, we weren't really using the agentic language at that time, right? There are things that the computers are really good at doing really quickly and can get it right most of the time. And those are the things that we should let the computers do. And then the humans, these like deeply experienced operational teams who have been with the firm for a long time, who know more about this than anybody else in the world, like we should be turning them, as you say, like to the kind of things that humans are very good at, right? Like things that require innovation, things that aren't just the average of every text corpus on the internet, but instead are like new, informed by like human thinking and collaboration within the firm. Like how do we take those folks and deploy them to things that are like uniquely driven by human insight and intuition and experience, right? And we achieved some great success doing that, for sure. I mean, right? Who knows what it's going to be like in 3 years ago, the world was really different. It's hard to imagine like in 3 years, it's going to be really hard to predict for sure.
Yeah, and it's like it's you automate the predictable and you humanize the exceptional, right?
You know, I think some part of it too is a little bit AI output is, in my experience at least, like it is fundamentally average, right? Like it is by definition a collection of many parts and then sort of the common string among them. That's what when it's a large language model.
Yeah.
And I know not everyone thinks this way, but like not everything a business does needs to be above average, right? Like actually most of the things that most companies do, they are average or worse at doing them.
Yep.
And if AI sort of forces your firm to start having real conversations about like, here are the things that we do which are uniquely valuable to our customers in the marketplace. Everything else is okay to be average. Well, then suddenly you can have a more, I think, reasonable conversation about how do agentic workflows, like how do they fit into our business model? And where do we really need to be like excelling? Where do we need like the human experts to really be leaning in? And how do we enable them to do that? Sometimes through automation or, you know, other ways too.
Or like AWS, right? Like undifferentiated heavy lifting, right? The question is like, what can be undifferentiated? You know, for purposes of the CDN conversation, I always talk about Netflix, right? Netflix is like credit card processing, AWS, generating thumbnails, AWS, you know, everything AWS. Delivering video to the only way we actually touch our customers, not AWS. We're gonna own that, and that's important for us to differentiate on. And
absolutely right.
It's you know and that's like the build versus buy conversation too a little bit, right?
Yeah,
Is like
I was just
the question is like, what do you want to own? And by own, I mean have to innovate on, have to maintain, you know, deal with the operational complexity of 15 years from now, right? If it's something that you go, wow, that is something we need to be a core part of our business, then you got to build. But if it is, well, I don't know that's really how we want to, you know, make our way through the world and put our, you know, dent in the universe on, it's probably a buy thing. And it doesn't even have to be articulated as can it be average or below average, but that's what it is, right? It's like, does it matter? And you know, like my full version of the CDN analogy, like why your CDN should matter if you're in the business of delivering content to consumers is just the you can do everything else average if you're a steakhouse except one item on your menu.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There's
the ribeye. You got to deliver on the ribeye.
There is like you want to buy your onions from Cisco or US Foods? Absolutely. You want, you know, everything else on the menu you can get from one place. But if you're in Manhattan and you're trying to stand out as a steak restaurant, you got to have the one steak purveyor that the person down the street doesn't have. Like what is your secret weapon? And if you're a fish restaurant, you got to have the fishmonger that nobody else has and whatever. And it's, but then you hear people like, oh, I'm just going to build my architecture the same as my competitor. And then it's like, okay. Right now it's like which chef is gonna cook it the best for this one customer this one time. That's a tough way to compete.
I kind of think that is the direction we're going, though, is this sort of customer focused part, right? Because the build versus buy dilemma, like what do we need to excel in versus what is okay to be okay? Like I do think that part of the future there is, well, for whom, right? Like, okay, we are the best in the world at this. And this idea of like, well, for whom are we the best in the world? And the reason that I do think this is related to the AI conversation too, is because like increasingly when we think about like the customers of a business, like increasingly those are like non-human entities, right? Especially with thinking about software. But increasingly, I don't know if you're following the news around like agentic commerce, but like it's pretty wild. And we have observed that over half of website traffic in 2024 was like non-human entities. Right. So we're already kind of there.
Right.
We're already sort of there. And if you're a business that does business on the internet, to hear like, oh, half of the visitors to my web property are no longer humans, that starts to change that calculus, right? Because we are humans, so we sort of center ourselves in our experience, right? But to think like, oh, my website, half of the entities traversing this website or this e-commerce store or this whatever are like non-human entities, well, suddenly you get all of these different questions, right? Like, well, how does an agent perceive this site? Like, how do they arrive? How do they like achieve success? Like, what are they looking for? Are they all good?
Yeah.
They're not. They're not all good, right? Just like humans, but maybe a little bit different, I guess. And this is something that we've been thinking about a lot, right? Is okay, especially because this is all rooted in CDNs ultimately, right? Like agents also download the content from a CDN. And that gives us like this really unique insight into how they traverse websites and how they engage with these web properties. And it's pretty different from humans. And I don't have like a great answer yet, but I do think that part of that question, right? Like how do we do the thing that we are best at in the world is going to have to start being informed by like for humans or like for bots, because those are very different audiences, right? That are achieving sometimes really different ends in ways that aren't super easy to understand yet.
Before we got on air, we were talking about, that's the new version of the buyer's journey, right? Or the customer journey is like, what is the agent journey or the bot journey? But is it its own journey, or is it a level of indirection between, you and the buyer's journey? I feel like that's still the question. Like, maybe that's too meta, right? Like you mentioned, agentic commerce is like, at the end of the day, probably most people's buyers are still humans, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if we go like that 2 or 3 years forward, and it's like, who's making the buying decision on, what? Let's take it something, sort of traditional. Who's making who's the buyer for cups to stock in the kitchen?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Today, the agent is a level of indirection between them and that person. In 2 years, the agent might be fully in charge of that, and that is your end customer.
I think, not to like belabor the point, but I think this is kind of that same like map versus territory conversation, right? Which is like at the map level, like, yeah, at the end of the day, there's a human and the human wants a coffee cup with a cat on it, right? And then some things are going to happen in the middle, and then they're going to have a cat. They're going to have a cat mug at the end. But the way that occurs, like actually on the internet, the content that's actually being delivered is super different. And I don't work at a frontier model, right? Like I actually don't know this for certain, but I would imagine that over time, the e-commerce stores, which create the lowest friction, the easiest access, the like maybe even advantageous pricing for agentic workflows, are going to see more and more of that traffic, right? So even though the person sort of has a mug at the end, the way that web presence, the way that those assets are presented and delivered to the bot traffic is going to matter. And like they do traverse websites very, very differently than humans, right? And often in ways that are like kind of confusing and distinct from human behavior, right? Like you can imagine, I just got a truck. I just got a pickup truck to go with my shirt. And you can imagine like if I needed to get some new wheels, I would go to a e-commerce site probably, and I would look at, okay, I know they're 18-inch rims. I'd look at all the kind of 18-inch rims. Maybe I add them to my cart to see like if there's a discount or not. think it's a very human way to engage with a website. Whereas we see AI like add 30 different sizes of wheels all to the cart at once. And it's like, what is going on here? And some part of it is price scraping, right? But some part of it might be e-commerce pursuant too. Maybe there's an agent that's like buying tires, like wheels in bulk, and then is going to resell them afterwards. Like, I don't know. But you can imagine like understanding how those behaviors are different between a human and a robot, or human and AI, I guess. I don't know. Robot kind of implies a certain physicality that, we don't need to get into
typing at the keyboard.
But yeah, literally. Oh yeah. I'm not ready for that one.
Yeah.
But like, it's different, and understanding that it's different and what you want to optimize for and who you want to optimize for is, I think, going to be the next step of like what it means to operate a business on the internet.
Yeah. And like, I think of even rudimentary, call it bot behavior, going back a while now, right? Like we're well into the, there are bots and some are good actors and some are bad actors. And, I remember hearing some of the original use cases for bad actors and being like, wow, that's like actually really smart. But those were, a predefined playbook that people would run. Like the one that comes to mind when we talk about, agents netting things to carts was years ago. There were bad bots that kind of like rogue travel sites would have. And if you clicked on their Google ad for, a flight from Chicago to New York, in the background, it would go to United.com and put all of the cheap fare seats in its cart so that when you went to United.com, it was like, oh, wow, it's actually $800. And they were still shopping you a $300 price. And it was like, wow, that's ingenious. Now bring it forward to 2026, not to date the episode too much. For those of you listening 5 years from now, aka nobody. Hi, Mom. What a real-time version of a bot going, oh, well, maybe I should do this instead. Like adding, a dynamic decision engine in real time to something that's, let's call it just trying to create friction or work against the humanoid buyer. That's another level of like, okay.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, even unintentional malicious actors, like you can imagine one of the things that we're observing, even in our current Bot Insights product, is that often when a site is getting like absolutely hammered by AI traffic, even if it's all ostensibly, neutral traffic, if it is pulling like just random URL queries, just like unexpected paths, and just like hammering your cache, well, your human customers on their iPhone trying to buy a pair of sneakers are having 1 second, 1.5 second, 2 second longer load times for key aspects of your funnel. And anybody who's done any e-commerce is going to tell you, like, if it takes you 2 seconds for your checkout page to load, your conversion rate is dropping off, right? And that's not even that these AI agents are like trying to harm you. And there actually is this entire landscape of actively harmful bots, right? Like click fraud is a huge part of it, right? Driving up your competitors' cost to advertise in search engines is part of it. Price scraping is part of it. Like there are active malevolence out there too, but there is also these unfortunate bang-on effects of just like largely uncoordinated AI landscape. And understanding, I think we're past, and it's so funny to talk about this today because it feels like I'm like barely hanging on to the news around this stuff. And it's hard to imagine in 6 months or in a year what the actual like reality is going to be. But even today, I think there is this sort of failure to appreciate the nuance of non-human entities, which is like, oh, we have some bots, we should block them, and then we're good, done and dusted. Whereas actually a lot of businesses, you think about like search scrapers, you think about like agentic e-commerce, like there are active non-human entities which are very beneficial for your business. And understanding who they are and giving them a great experience, I mean, is going to be super important. It's important now. It's going to be increasingly important as your competitors already start to do that.
Yeah.
Right. Because these are not static entities. Like the web assets, the websites that make it easy as possible for these agents to access and have success are going to get an increase in traffic, right?
Sure.
Because they are ultimately like learning, not actually learning, but they're optimization machines.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's part of it, right? Is this more nuanced idea? Like there's good, there's bad, but there's also good and bad based on your business model.
Right.
You can imagine the New York Times has a very different interest in understanding how AI is engaging with their site than Zappos, right?
Sure.
And ultimately, like that's really where we're driving is not just you've got some bots, but what's your business? What is the important things people and bots do on your website? And how do we get you the understanding that you need and the recommendations to improve like your specific business in this case?
Yeah, and then there's also, the unintended consequences of like two good bots, both doing good things at the same time. Like again, it was pre AI, but I'm trying to think of what the current version would look like. Like there's some weird science textbook on Amazon that was selling for $218,000 because there were two different pricing bots, each being like, oh, we should charge $1 more than the competitor. And they just every day they just kept adding price to the book, and there was no intelligence, so it got to $218,000. The agentic version of that in this year, ideally goes, well, maybe $218,000 is a lot for this book,
Right.
or not, right? Or there's other secondary and tertiary consequences to it. So, like, I think that's the most interesting part about it. Like the technology itself, you mentioned earlier, it's still, somebody described it previously on the show as like a really eager high school intern,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Which is like, you gotta, like my favorite, even now, my favorite prompt, even for Claude doing coding things or agentic tasks is, are you sure?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like that you still have to just be like, let's just hang on a second here.
It's funny. I was talking with my brother about this, my brother Lincoln, and I was saying a lot of what you're saying. I was like, I didn't even know that today was Thursday. And he was like, Simon, you got to understand, like the version of Claude you're working with today is the worst version that you're going to work with for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God. I don't know if I was ready. I wasn't ready for that.
No,
I wasn't ready for that.
But at the same time, there was a great CDN quote that I like of, discounting has to naturally decelerate as something approaches zero.
Yeah.
At the same time, improvements need to slow down the better something gets. And so, which is not nearly as an articulate way as the first version, but that's also, I think of other parts of this. Like my standard answer for AI a year ago, which I no longer say because I actually think the progress has been great, is like, I'm not really that worried about AI taking over the world, considering I can stick my hands in front of a hand dryer and it only recognizes them as hands like 20% of the time, and it only has one job.
Yeah.
And so I think of that as like, whoa, technology we can identify, and then it just like, it still actually can't figure out if there's hands under it. Or, even Elon, like I look at the self-driving thing, and he's like, we're going to have self-driving everything in the next year. And then you ask him a year later, he's like, you guys don't understand how hard this is. It's like, you're the one who said it was going to take a year.
You told us, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's a Tesla corollary, I think, to all the agentic stuff, which I think is also what, maybe is the adoption curve holdback for something like live event automation and like actually having it make the decisions, which is like, there is no doubt today on a per mile basis that Tesla autopilot is safer than a human driving.
Mm-hmm.
However, for the outliers, the thing that goes on your tombstone is really stupid. Right? Like here lies Matt because his car thought a semi-truck was the moon. The version of that's like, oh, we switched we remapped all of North America to the pop in, Johannesburg because we thought there was lower latency to this one thing that was broken. Like the average decision is maybe better, right? Like if you just said, what's better, a rule that somebody wrote 5 months ago about where traffic should go, or an agentic AI looking at real-time stuff for, by IP address or ASN or whatever and making a decision, like on average, it will be better. But on average, you're going to have more people in Arkansas served from Australia than if a human had done it. And it's that sort of like edge case thing that I think throws people off, in the same way that like Claude will write me code, that will do all sorts of things that I want. It also can't identify the parts of a bicycle and label them. So it's like you look at that and you're like, how do I trust this thing to, write code to, that I'm going to embed in my platform? But at the same time, when I ask it to draw me a bicycle, it identifies the seat as not a seat. And like,
I think so much of it is similar to what you were talking about before, which is this like super eager intern piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, you wouldn't put a super eager intern, you wouldn't put them on call on their first week.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, you got to train them. You got to onboard them. You got to kind of put them through orientation. And one of the things I've found, like hiring very smart, eager people who maybe aren't super versed in like product management yet, is they like ask questions and they behave in ways that indicate to me, oh, like I have a gap in the way that I'm expressing my expectations. Right. And I think a lot of this, like the future of agentic workflows, especially in these operational spaces, are going to be a lot of that give and take, right? It's going to be a lot of like, oh, this is breaking in interesting ways, but it's breaking in interesting ways because like I made assumptions about kind of what I thought was already present or what was expressed or how, or maybe actually the way that I was like ranking these particular outcomes is not actually consistent with what I believe, right? It's this kind of interesting like reflection forcing function, right? And I think we see this in like smaller ways. I don't know what your writing style is like, but I have stopped using like M dashes in my personal writing because now that's like, it's a flag for AI, right? So it's kind of interesting that like, this is causing me to change my behavior, right? And I think in a similar way, like a highly energetic, super smart new hire can make you reflect on how you have always been doing things and maybe how you've expressed your interests and your expectations. Like, so too can these workflows. Like if we give them time to grow, right? We give them time to be onboarded and to orient them, right? I do think the future is bright there, but I agree. Like it isn't reasonable to just say like, oh, we installed Claude. Now it's going to do all of our traffic routing. And it's going to go great, because it's not going to go great.
Right.
Like it's Claude's first day.
We're going to lay off 30% of the workforce now because it's funny. Like the writing thing, we just went through a hiring cycle, and 3 of the 4 candidates for a position for sure hand wrote their thank you emails. And one of them for sure AI'd their thank you email.
That's interesting.
And I went, I don't actually know what my feeling is on the 4th person. Am I going, that's disappointing? Or am I going, you're exactly the type of person that we need working here because you're going to take advantage of technology and yada, yada, yada. Or 5th version, or should you have used this but obscured it more so that I didn't know that, like
maybe it's actually,
there's so many levels of like what is correct, like what is the correct use or not use that I think, to your point, it's like you just need to start onboarding it and go through that normal procedure. Like I find myself, like I use a lot of Claude now for doing like quick, dirty POC things. And I figured out that most of the value for me is not in its writing of code, it's in clarifying my spec.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Because usually what happens is I'm like, no, actually I meant this. No, actually I meant that. No. When I was thinking we should do it this way. And then I get to I haven't quite decided how I think about it, but I get to some point where the best thing to do is stop and start again with now my consolidated, project spec. And then it makes the POC. Because usually there's so much scope creep in what I'm asking it to build that by the end, it's not really that clear. But what I do have now is the fully, script, I think that's a word, document that I can then go back and feed in and go, okay, now that I have this, let's just build this one time and start fresh. And like, to me, that's been illuminating because I never get to that point with a human. A human never tells me, whoa, you've changed so many things here. Maybe we should start fresh, right? They just keep going, of course, sure. New question.
It's, I know we don't have a ton of time. I know this is not a capital P, capital M product management podcast, but I don't know what it's going to look like to do product management in 2 years. Just the nature of AI tooling and the ease of like producing prototype ready code and the like documentation alignment, it's the whole thing is changing. It's like, do we need PRDs anymore?
Right.
Like, do we need like the role of the product manager is just fundamentally changing. And it's a little bit kind of interesting and exciting to be working in tech right now, because suddenly we're not just asking like, oh, how do we build something that creates value for our customers and, generates revenue for the business? Like the entire script, the entire playbook of like how we achieve that is itself kind of suddenly in question.
Yeah.
Which is a little scary. Like it's scary in some ways, but in other ways, it's really forcing us to say like, okay, well, what is it's for, see above, right? Scroll up. Like, what is the core value that we're providing, right? Like, what is the thing that we are doing that must produce above average outcomes? And like, what can we then leverage to get to those outcomes faster or more effectively? And I don't really know. It's a little bit like, well, you got to work it. We're going to work it, and it'll work if we work it. And we just have to kind of stay attentive and try to get ahead of the changes. It's hard, but it's fun for sure.
I think the best like high level thing I heard from somebody who's non-technical but kind of a deep thinker on things is the value is no longer like the human value is really, if it still is today, won't be for long, is no longer knowledge. It's meaning, right? Like the knowledge you can now outsource, which has been true for a long time, right? Like if you even think of some of the dated concepts of the way we educate kids, right? Is like, you have to memorize the capital of Argentina.
Buenos Aires.
Wow. But like I could Google like,
Yeah.
why, how is that a life benefiting
Yeah.
skill, right? As opposed to like teaching you how to think through, well, you have these series of capitals,
Yeah.
how is life different in those places, and what does that mean to the people there? Like those types
sure.
of things are still uniquely human, but the knowledge isn't anymore. And like,
Yeah.
the ability
That's
to distill knowledge into meaning, and or to take meaning and turn it into something that an agent can make for you. That's still the uniquely human part that, again, who knows 5 years from now, but that's the hard part of replicating the human brain is not its ability to recall the capital of a city. If anything, it's worse than that today than computers. But the thing that computers in the short term don't seem to have any way to catch up to is the ability to connect disparate thoughts and turn those things into a narrative. And so I think that, so if I like that high level example, which I do, distill that down into the, what does it mean to build product or build something? It is, it's the skill isn't the shovel in the ground, right? The skill was in deciding where where you were going to make the job site.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we've come to a really similar conclusion, which is, as the bottleneck in software development moves from our capacity to build software, well, then there must be a new bottleneck. Like, what then is the new thing that is preventing us from achieving the outcome that we want? And my sense is it's very much what you're describing, where to dig the hole, right? Like, how do I use my experience, my understanding of the customer, of the market, of our engineers' capabilities to decide like, okay, well, this is the direction we're going to go 1,000,000 miles an hour in. Because it's very easy to go super fast in the wrong direction, easier now than it has ever been, right? So suddenly this idea of like, okay, making discerning decisions about the right bets to move forward with, I feel like that's kind of become increasingly the role of the product organization.
Yeah. And then to close the loop on the analogy, so you go, okay, so I've got a very eager high school intern. Do I make them in charge of strategy or execution?
Right.
And framing it that way. So what's the most valuable part?
I like that.
Yeah.
And so do they have the shovel? Who has the shovel?
I don't know.
on
I
this
lost
one?
that. That's a different analogy. I lost track of that one. But yeah, they're the ditch digger.
Yeah.
Right. That's what it is. Right. Is the value is, the value is in knowing where to dig, whether it's for a ditch or to dig up dinosaur bones or whatever it is. Those strategy decisions, I think it's a more interesting challenge though, because as you become distant from the work, there's a feedback loop that's lost. So you have to be better at pure strategy with less inputs, which I think is I don't think that's something that is a non-human is going to be able to replace anytime soon. I don't know what that timescale. Your definition of soon is as good as mine, but yeah, I think it's a tool. It's the microchip. Like the microchip is going to let Microsoft Excel run calculations faster than anybody else has ever seen.
Right.
Somebody's still got to design the spreadsheet and build the calculations, and it's going to do great at doing the calculations. But, Microsoft Excel did not put any CFOs out of work.
Right.
Right. Or anybody. Right. It's just a tool that people started using to do their job. And so, I don't know. That's my I'm not afraid of Skynet. At least not yet.
I'm not saying I'm not afraid of Skynet. That's not
Yeah.
that's not my position. I'm still pretty scared.
Yeah.
But I do think the tool framing, especially in our professional context, I think that's the right mindset, right? It's something that allows us to focus on the things that we can uniquely do to provide value, right?
Yeah. So with that said, I want to tie this back to the conversation specifically around multi-CDN. And so, I think Hydrolix has an interesting seat on that ride right now. And I guess my question would be, today, from where you sit, are most people's deployments smart, or are they just complicated?
Well, it can be both. It can be both, right?
Yeah.
But I do think that today, most of the folks operating in a multi-CDN environment, and this isn't for lack of interest or lack of like sophistication, it's just not it's like the trade-off is not apparent, right?
Yeah.
Like you create a highly automated system 5 years ago was incredibly expensive. And in the same reason that people are hesitant to move ostensibly from one commodity to another, right? Like, oh, we can just swap out 80% of our traffic. Should be easy, right? In the same way, like CDN delivery, multi-CDN or not, that's still the last mile, right? Like that is the connective tissue between your customer and you. And any kind of changes you make there, especially on automation, feel really risky, right? And ultimately, like if your customer, if that show doesn't load, if that PDF doesn't download, like they're not going to blame your CDN vendor, right? They're going to blame you. And I think risk aversion in that space has been pretty warranted for a long time.
Yeah, and I feel like the thing about commodities is that they only look like commodities to people who aren't in the industry. Right? Like where that's not your job. Like so even take the coffee bean example. If your your business is in place to sell people coffee, you don't think of beans as you want that one farm that gave you your beans last month that your customer said tasted really good. If you're in the trucking industry, you're transporting a commodity of coffee beans, or you're transporting a truck full of oranges. But if you sell orange juice, you're not really like, you know what, I just want to interchange stuff because it's just a commodity. You want the one
Yeah. So really, I mean, it's funny, like to say that to identify a good as a commodity does the thing that we've been talking about this whole time, which is it flattens it to a single value, despite the fact that actually there could be really different
so
things
unique,
going
right?
on
Like
there.
no coffee company says buy from us. We just buy commodity beans from anywhere and roast them, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think that's the rub with the commodities is like maybe it's a Dunning-Kruger thing, right? Which is I remember reading a long time ago, the more experienced you are in an industry, the more likely you are to buy generics, right? Like a doctor is way more likely to buy generic ibuprofen than a consumer, and it's the same thing. Like once you're once you're inside the industry, like once you're in coffee, you probably don't think all coffee is the same.
Right.
But my mom for sure is like all coffee beans are the same, right? They're
Yeah, right.
So yeah, I don't know. There's some reverse Dunning-Kruger there, I think. But
Mm-hmm.
this was awesome. I feel like I want to ask you for a last thought, but I feel like we got it with the
Yeah. I
the
don't know if I have
last
any
20
more.
minutes
Yeah.
were a pretty good last thought. So
Yeah.
thank you again. For those who
course.
are listening and aren't familiar, Hydrolix.com, you'll see how to spell it in the show notes.
.io. Yeah.
Sorry, .io. You'll see it in the show
You got
notes. You know, we're on a bit of a ride right now, both in terms of Agentic AI, in terms of Multi-CDN, in terms of delivery of video. I think everything is going to look so different 5 years from now. So maybe we do a follow-up in 5 years, and if Skynet will permit us.
Yeah, right. I'm more than happy. I'd love to come back. This was awesome. Thank you so very much for having me.
Thanks so much, Simon.
This is different, another round, so much more to talk about. Gonna aim to satisfy with help from CacheFly. Get to it fast. Right here on the Anycast. Make it strong, make it last. Right here on the Anycast. The Anycast podcast, brought to you by CacheFly.